This morning, is Texas really ready to reopen on Wednesday and take off our masks? What kind of political pressure did Governor Abbott face to make that announcement? Legislative solutions now emerging after the deadly power outages. Should ERCOT become a state agency now rather than a nonprofit corporation? Listen to what Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick told us. And talk of another major restructuring in Austin, perhaps putting the Railroad Commission under the Public Utility Commission, keeping natural gas and electricity under the same oversight. State Senator Nathan Johnson shared the chatter with us on that. Plus, Congress is now investigating the Texas power failures last month. What can Congress do? Republican Representative Michael Mccall is with us from Washington.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning to our viewers across the state. Let's begin this week with some of the political stories you might have missed across Texas. Republicans in the state legislature have filed legislation to rein in the governor. One bill filed would prohibit any government official from mandating that people wear masks. Private businesses could do what they want. Representative Matt Schaefer there filed this. He's a Republican from Tyler. Other conservatives have now signed on to it, but we'll be watching to see how Governor Abbott responds. A freshman congressman from Texas is in the news for all the wrong reasons right now. Ronnie Jackson is a Republican who represents Amarillo in the Panhandle down through Wichita Falls. Before getting elected last year, though, he was a doctor to President Obama and to President Trump. But a Pentagon investigation is now accusing Jackson of drinking on duty and bullying people who worked for him at the White House. Jackson denies those allegations. And the race to replace the late Congressman Ron Wright has turned into a massive ballot. 23 people are officially running for that seat right now, 11 Republicans and 10 Democrats. The filing deadline to run was last Wednesday. The special election is May 1st. Congressman Wright represented parts of Tarrant, Navarro, and Ellis counties in North Texas. He died last month from COVID. Nothing about the Texas legislature was normal when lawmakers gavelled into session in January. Then came February and those deadly statewide power outages. Now here in March, Governor Abbott is reopening our state this week and eliminating the mask mandate. Our first guest this morning, the number 2 official in the state, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, with a look ahead at how the state is going to handle all of these issues. Governor Patrick, good to see you. Thanks for the time. I wanted to ask you about the state reopening on Wednesday. It's going to reopen at 100%, what Governor Abbott said, and the mask mandate is going to be dropped. Are we going to see Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick in a mask at all after Wednesday?
You will at times, because one of the things I do, Jason, as I travel around Texas, and I've been all over Texas, in the last several months, in the last year, there are some areas where seldom will you see a mask. I was in Georgetown, Texas for an event Thursday night, 150 seniors. I saw 2 masks. I'll be in other areas where a lot of people are wearing masks, and out of respect to them, I'll wear my mask.
Governor, one thing people are saying is, why not open the state to 100%, but still maintain the mask mandate? Why do both at the same time?
Well, that was the governor's decision. I was not a part of the decision. I support the decision, but that was his decision. So you would have to ask him on why he did it that way. But again, Jason, lots of people, you go out in the suburbs, go out in rural Texas, no one's wearing a mask. I went to my kids' Little League ball games the other day north of Houston, out in Montgomery County, where I live. And there were 500-600 people there for opening day for 5- and 6-year-olds. I didn't see anyone with a mask.
At the top of your legislative priorities list, behind the budget, which of course has to be passed, is reform to ERCOT and reform to the Public Utility Commission. We're 3 weeks post this event when the power went out. What are the legislative fixes being talked about there in the Capitol that you like, that you're really going to put on the front burner?
Well, we've had many days of hearings already, and they're going to continue. There's a lot to peel away from the onion here to see what happened, why it happened, and how to avoid it moving forward. As you know, almost a week ago now, last Monday, I sent a letter to the PUC chairman, Mrs. Walker, and also to the CEO of ERCOT, Bill Magnus, and asked for their resignation. She resigned that day, and he was fired 2 days later when he wouldn't resign. Because, look, they're good people. I'm trying to make it personal. But the bottom line is, when they testified, the testimony was abysmal. I mean, they were asked what they could have done better, and neither had an answer. When they were asked by senators from both parties multiple times, what would you do to fix it? No answers. Well, we can't fix a system if the people who were there in charge of it when it broke down don't even have any ideas of what they did wrong or how they would fix it. So that's why I asked them to step down. The first thing we will do is pass a bill to reform the ERCOT board, because the ERCOT is actually a private company, Jason, under PUC, Public Utilities Commission, which oversees them. That's an agency. But this private company, they have been electing their own board members, and as we know, from outside of Texas. And when one board member steps down, they kind of pick their successor. You know, it's worked for 20 years this way. Well, it crashed several weeks ago, and it's not going to work that way anymore. Almost everyone that the governor appoints, or I appoint, or the speaker appoints to various commissions, they all come through the Senate for a nomination hearing and confirmation. So we're going to reform that so we can get a new board in place before we leave.
One last question before we let you go. You mentioned how ERCOT is a separate 501c4 corporation.
Yes.
Should ERCOT as a corporation be brought back into the fold as a state agency?
Jason, I don't have that answer today. And we're working, some of these answers I've given you were some of the quick things we've seen that obviously were fixes. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm starting with a clean sheet of paper. I'm starting from scratch. And if that needs to happen, I think then it should happen. Here's the interesting point. And I said this to the governor and the speaker the other day in a meeting. Most people don't realize ERCOT was a private company that was basically hired by the PUC to run the energy and run the grid. But we as elected officials are held responsible for those actions. I don't like being held responsible to a company that I have little to no control over. So I think that we may see a move to bring ERCOT back in as a state agency, or if it's still a private company, we'll have many more controls, including who sits on the board, because we want to know who those people are.
Governor, we will be watching. We appreciate the time as always.
Thank you, Jason.
If you had a child in college or even in a private school last year, you might be able to relate to this. A student at UT Austin is suing the university. She says the quality of classes dropped when they went strictly online last year during the pandemic, and she is arguing in court that the tuition should have dropped as well. The lawsuit asks for a prorated refund of tuition for all that time she spent in online classes. Now, Ross Ramsey correctly said this is something we probably should be keeping an eye on. He's the co-founder and executive editor of the Texas Tribune in Austin, as always. Ross, good to see you.
Good morning, Jason. How are you?
Doing well here. 51,000 students attend UT Austin. This seems like it has the potential really to spin up kind of fast into a class action suit, maybe.
Well, she can't be the only one who feels this way, and probably UT is not the only school that has a potential liability here. If you're not getting the education you paid for because you don't get it in the classroom, or you don't get the socialization you hoped for at college, and you think the price is wrong, if this thing catches on, it could be a big deal.
Indeed so. Let's stay at UT for a moment and talk about the school song down there facing a lot of scrutiny. The song is called The Eyes of Texas, for those of you who did not attend UT. But activists say this song has racist undertones. They want a new school song. What do you think is going to happen next?
The university is going to come out with a report on this song in the next week or so to try to describe, where it fits historically and what the deal is with it. I don't know if they can get to a compromise here, because it seems like a binary. You either think the song is fine in spite of its history, or you think the history isn't messed up, or you think the song is not fine no matter how all that comes out. I don't know how they settle this one.
Wow, a lot to see, a lot to watch rather in Austin at UT. Thanks a lot, Ross. Back to you in just a moment. Coming up, state lawmakers are talking about a substantial restructuring of government to prevent another deadly power outage in Texas. State Senator Nathan Johnson shared this chatter with us from the Capitol. And Congress took the day off last Thursday after a threat of more violence. But if lawmakers cannot conduct the people's business, do these extremists win in the end? One of our questions for Congressman Michael Mccall when we come back. You're watching Inside Texas Politics. For a couple of weeks now, we've been asking what concrete changes might come out of last month's deadly power outages. Our next guest shared something interesting with us. One idea being discussed at the Capitol right now is maybe putting the Railroad Commission, which oversees natural gas, maybe putting that under the Public Utility Commission, which oversees electricity. What's the whole point for that, right? Well, we just discovered, all of us just discovered, how interdependent gas and electricity are on each other here in Texas. Natural gas fuels most electric power plants in our state. State Senator Nathan Johnson is a Democrat from Dallas, and he joined us from his office at the Capitol to explain. Senator Johnson, it's good to see you. I want to ask you about something you wrote to your constituents. In just the last matter of days, we have seen the head of the PUC resign, ERCOT CEO Bill Magnus get fired by the board, and you told your constituents it's tempting to call for heads to roll, but beware in our overzealous search for personal fault. We're almost certainly going to miss the larger structural and systemic issues of failure and loss, and that leads to mistakes we cannot afford. Are you concerned now with those two top people gone that the situation might be viewed as being over?
I am concerned about that because, and I think we need to have continued pressure from the public and continued pressure and understanding within the legislature that we do have larger systemic structural problems with the way we have designed our market. Absolutely.
And you've heard, 2 or 3 weeks of testimony now, off and on. What is obvious there at the top that you think that can be done to fix this legislatively?
What's obvious is that however ingenious and careful the construction of this market might have been, it didn't anticipate these conditions. So we found ourselves in conditions that the market was never intended to function in, and it failed. It collapsed, and it resulted in somewhere between 22 or 45 billion, lots and lots and lots of billions of dollars in energy costs that we should not have sustained if things had functioned properly. And just one note, typically invoices for an entire year out of ERCOT amount to about $5 billion. We spent through ERCOT $22 billion in a week.
Well, what kind of say do you think Democrats are going to have in a fix? And secondly, is there any change out there that's being talked about in the back halls of the Capitol that you might oppose?
I think that the partisanship is not going to be as important on this issue as it is on some other things. There are some, there's always contests between renewables and thermals, but even that doesn't always fall along partisan lines. I will happily report that the conversations, the studies, the questions right now have, like I said, less partisan. It's not that it's absent, but I intend for my voice to be prominent in all of this, as well as my fellow Democrats, and I'm working with my Republican colleagues. I don't think partisanship is going to cripple us on this one.
One thing under discussion is potentially putting the Railroad Commission, which has elected members, putting that under the Public Utility Commission, which has appointed members. What's your take on that?
It's addressing a serious problem because what we have is a utility, electricity, whose prices are dependent on a commodity, natural gas, which is regulated by a completely separate entity. So it makes some sense to collapse the oversight of the whole system. Now, whether it's going to be elected officials or appointed officials, that's a difficult question too. So without trying to come up with a structure, it addresses a problem that we need to address.
On Wednesday, businesses will be able to open at 100% capacity, and the governor said that face masks are no longer going to be mandated by the state just in the next few days here. Is that a mistake?
It was astonishing. I don't know anybody else who thinks that was a good idea. And I hope that history proves his judgment good, because I don't want people to get sick and die. But no, I don't think it was good judgment. I think it was, frankly, intended to kind of shift the conversation away some of our own problems.
Senator Nathan Johnson, it's good to see you again. Thanks for the time.
Thank you for having me here again.
Now to Washington, D.C., where Congress has talked about it for months, another stimulus package. This weekend, though, that finally looks a lot closer to reality. Our next guest is Congressman Michael Mccall, a Republican who represents a wide swath of Central Texas, from Austin over to Houston. And he's joining us right now from his office in Washington, D.C. about threats facing the U.S. Capitol and why he voted against the latest stimulus proposal. Congressman Mccall, it's good to see you. I want to start with the stimulus plan, which is what everyone's talking about in D.C. right now. The House passed it along party lines, but Republicans voted against it. You were one of the Republicans who voted against it. I'm curious if you can tell me more about that, because the Texas unemployment rate's at 7.2%. That's higher than the national average. Texans need help. Why are you against it?
Well, because only about 9% actually dealt with the vaccine and delivery of the vaccine, and it was COVID related. There was so much other stuff in there that had absolutely nothing to do with it. And you're talking about almost $2 trillion now. We're getting about the size of the GDP in terms of our national debt. I was very disappointed that Speaker Pelosi and Schumer decided to just sort of go it alone and go through reconciliation and not make this a bipartisan effort.
Congressman, a congressional subcommittee is now investigating ERCOT here in Texas and the power failures that happened last month. It's asking for information and documents. I realize you don't sit on that committee or the subcommittee involved, but what do you expect that Congress might do about what happened here in February?
At the federal level, we need to look at this, the ERCOT grid itself, and look at the creative ways to how can we winterize it, but also in a time of emergency, could we somehow tap into another power grid if necessary?
Is that something the taxpayers should pay for, or is it something the private industry should pay for?
Well, I think both. I think the private sector, it's going to have to be part of doing business, really, is that we have to have minimal standards when it comes to winterization, which threw everything off. And it wasn't just wind and solar. It also was, natural gas was probably 70% of the ERCOT grid, and those wellheads got frozen.
I want to ask you about the threats of another attack on the Capitol from the QAnon conspiracy theorists. The House shut down on Thursday out of concern that violence could happen again. I'm curious to know whether you think that was a mistake, and if Congress cannot conduct its business, don't these people win in the end?
Well, I mean, it's a great question, and I think at some point we're going to have to open the Capitol back up. But as a former federal prosecutor and one that did counterterrorism, yeah, it all has to be threat-based. I had to take that threat seriously after what happened on January 6th, but I did feel a lot safer because we did have razor wire in the National Guard. There's another threat coming up for the joint session of Congress where the president will be speaking in March. But I do think after that, and all threat-based, but after that, I think we need to start sort of winding down. This is the people's house, after all. And I don't think we can be fenced out with razor wire and with thousands of National Guard members. We can't keep doing this forever.
Is there already a threat for when the president speaks there to Congress?
Yes.
Wow. Yeah. Congressman Mccall, it's good to see you again. We appreciate the time.
Well, thanks for having me. Hello to everybody.
Those deadly power outages have led to a number of lawsuits. We'll look at the politics around a legislative fix. And did Governor Abbott face political pressure when he decided to fully reopen Texas later this week? Our conversation begins right there, next on the Roundtable.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Ross is back with us. Bud Kennedy is here from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And of course, Bernadine Steptoe, the political producer at WFAA in Dallas, joins us each week. And Ross, will start with you with the big news this week, and that is businesses on Wednesday can start operating at 100% capacity. Masks are no longer required by the state. The question is, did Governor Abbott face any political pressure to come out and make this announcement last week?
I think he probably did. I don't know that that's exactly why he did this, but it was clearly a lot of pressure on him. This clearly relieves some of it. The real question now is whether those businesses open that widely and whether people keep wearing masks or not. We'll see whether the government restrictions were why they were behaving or not.
And Bud, what do you think? Was political pressure involved? And if so, explain from whom?
I think the pressure of the calendar. I think the 2024 election has started this week, and if not at least the 2022. I think all of the talk of let's just all try to get along is faded, and I think the governor felt like he had to consolidate his Republican support, and he had to start talking a good game. And you see right away he turned against. There were a few people with COVID who've been released at the border. Seeking asylum, and right away he tried to turn that into the issue. It was all about that he's fighting Joe Biden, and he has to start fighting Joe Biden from now to 2024.
And Bernadine, how much of it was consolidating the Republican base? Because there is chatter out there that Governor Abbott might face a primary challenger. Who knows if that will happen and who it might be from?
I think it 100%. As I've mentioned the last few shows, he is in campaign mode. and he's going to do everything that he can to consolidate his base. So I think this is all about consolidating his base, and we're going to see more of that. I think that most of his agenda will be about that.
And Ross, the other obviously huge story are the power problems in this state. The PUC chair resigned. ERCOT's CEO was fired from his job. Lawsuits are stacking up. What kind of, do you expect a substantial fix to happen in the legislature? Or is this something that's going to be, recommendations and pushed on down the road?
The way you get around something like this, if you can, is you wait till voters stop paying attention to it. And I don't think the voters are going to stop paying attention this time. I think the legislature can't get away this time without doing nothing, or without doing something rather. I think we'll see some weatherization. We might see some other stuff, but they seem pretty intent on actually getting something changed here.
And Bud, it seems like this could eat up the entire session.
I think energy reform and the budget will eat up most of what's left of the session. They'll have to go into a special for something else, then they'll have redistricting. The things that won't get done, some political things will get done. Probably that bill punishing cities if they try to defund the police, that'll get done. But some of the things won't get done, like maybe taking away the governor's powers during a pandemic.
We shall see on that one. Bernadine, final word.
Well, they're not going to take away the governor's powers. Number one, he's not going to sign any bill that's presented on his desk. But I think I'm in agreement that the energy issue is not going to go away. They're going to have to do something. Let's just hope